All right. Hello, everybody. We got getting close to half the people that registered and stuff. So we just want to say welcome, and we'll wait a couple more minutes. Um, they're all on health physics time, so we'll give them a few more minutes to come in and get off their other meetings and such. So we'll wait just a couple more, just another minute or two. For any of those that are asking any friends, colleagues, and such that want to can't make it today and want to see a video, I should be able to have it recorded and have it posted. Probably send it to all the attendees. If I can, I'll put it on the health physics LinkedIn page or Facebook page. We'll get it out there for other people to see. A few more. So yeah, we'll hit off right at 3:03. It's about 20 seconds. All right. All right. Well, we have half. We have 50%. So we're going to call that a quorum. We'll go ahead and get started. The others are just hopefully know the answers for the test at the end and everything. So, all right, welcome everybody. I'm Dustin Miller. I'm the secretary for the Health Physics Society Decommissioning section. We meet frequently. We set up some special sessions, set up some webinars. So if you are at the Health Physics Society meeting this coming July, please feel free to jump by, come by our special session on decommissioning, or anytime if you want to join the section or whatnot. We'd love to have you come and join the section, and if you want to be on the executive board and everything, that'd be great. We got Ken Gavlik here too. I know Ken, if you want to say anything, he's the ex officio president or chair of the section and such. But definitely, if you ever want to join in the decommissioning section, just give Ken or myself or Phil Rutherford, Kevin Banks or Ron Oons, just give us a shout. We'd love to have you join the section, and the board as well. All right, got more and more people coming in. So, all right, without further ado, I'll introduce Tom Hansen here. Tom Hansen Jr. is the executive director of the Southeast Interstate Low-Level Radioactive Waste Compact. He is the former owner and president of Physics LLC, a USNRC licensed decommissioning and waste management firm that he founded himself in 2008. Tom is a certified health physicist and holds a bachelor's degree in radiation protection, a master's degree in radiation health physics, and a PhD in public health. Dr. Hansen has previously served as the chairman of the Low-Level Waste Forum, an organization that serves as a consolidated voice for states and compacts on matters related to radioactive waste policymaking, and he will retake that role again in April of this year. So maybe that's already occurred, Tom. Are you again the chairman, or?
I am.
All right.
As of about a week ago.
All right. Welcome, Chairman. Welcome, everybody. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments and everything, and we'll go over any of those questions at the end of Tom's presentation. So I will turn it over to you, Tom.
All right. Let me share my screen. And you should be able to see my presentation, and you should be able to hear me, right?
Yep.
All right, good. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. As Dustin mentioned, my name is Tom Hansen, and I'm the executive director of the Southeast Interstate Low-Level Radioactive Waste Management Compact Commission. or the Southeast Compact for short. The compact itself is comprised of the 6 states you see here: Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Virginia. And we'll get into some more detail about what a compact actually is in a little bit. The mission of the compact is to ensure that adequate, reliable, and appropriate waste management services are available to manage any low-level radioactive waste that is generated in our region, and to promote and facilitate the maximum use of those services by the party states. I've been in this role for about 4 years now, since the beginning of 2022. If my name sounds familiar, though, it's probably not because of my involvement with the compact. Most people to recognize me as a result of that NRC licensed decommissioning and waste management firm that I founded in 2008, Ameriphysics. Ameriphysics license allows it to conduct decommissioning and waste management activities. And the company completed more than 250 of those types of projects under my leadership at a wide variety of clients, all kinds of government and commercial clients. In 2022, I decided to start turning over the day-to-day operations of Ameriphysics to my sons, and that was completed late last year. All that is to say that I'm speaking to you today about waste management and the compact system from two totally different perspectives. First, as a commercial decommissioner who was oftentimes frustrated by the compact system, but also as an executive administrator of what is arguably the nation's largest compact. 24 of the nation's 94 commercial nuclear power plants operate in our region. We have a large number of waste processing facilities in Tennessee and Florida. We have multiple national laboratories. We have a fuel fabricator, plenty of hospitals and universities that use radioactive material. And 2 of the nation's 3 largest fusion companies are currently building facilities in our region that are expected to be operated in the next few years. When I travel to meetings, these are the kinds of things I hear from people. When people see my badge, when people read my bio, when people ask what my job is, and I tell them, these are the things I hear, the questions I get asked. And to be honest, I used to say and ask these same things. I'll hear things like the compact system is broken, it's useless, it's worthless, it's a failure. The only reason it exists is because states are looking to collect money, or because someone who's administering the compact is on some sort of power trip. I hear that disposal would be less expensive if compacts would just get out of the way. Our compact doesn't have a disposal site, so I'm asked why we even need a compact. I'm told that compacts don't add any value, and just plainly, I hate the compact system. And so the purpose of this presentation today is really just talk to you about how we got to where we're at, why I don't see it changing in the future, and what are the benefits of a compact system. And to do so, I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start by talking about the history of low-level radioactive waste management. That it is a unique history, and it really is the reason we got to where we're at. And really, it all started with the end of World War II in 1945. Immediately after that, we had all this technology we had just developed. That technology looked like it would continue to be valuable to us from a security standpoint, but also looked like there were opportunities in order to leverage that technology in order to benefit the nation from an economic standpoint. And in 1946, the Atomic Energy Act was enacted, which was intended to help us to do it. That act told us how the U.S. would control and manage these technologies. Um, it, it said that weapons development and nuclear power management would be under civilian rather military control, and it established an organization called the Atomic Energy Commission for this purpose. That act was again amended in 1954 to promote development of nuclear energy during Eisenhower's Atoms of Peace program. And that act covers the development, regulation, and disposal of nuclear materials and facilities in the U.S. And that act still exists today. Whenever Congress um, passes various acts that are nuclear in some aspect, they go back to the Atomic Energy Act and they modify it. The Advance Act of 2024, when that act came out, the end result of that was the Atomic Energy Act is modified. Shortly thereafter, we started disposing of radioactive materials. And the way that we accomplished it, and really the way the world accomplished it, was via ocean disposal. And those disposals began in 1946 off the coast of California, but then also off the coast of Massachusetts, New Jersey, South Carolina, and Texas. And the way that disposal happened is it was 55-gallon sealed drums that they filled up with waste, and then they topped off the drum with concrete. Now, the drum and the concrete were never intended to encapsulate this radioactive waste forever. In fact, they expected that within a 10-year time frame, the exterior of the drum would rust away, the concrete would crumble, and the radioactive materials would be released into the ocean. It really was only to allow, the concrete was really to get the drum to sink to the bottom. And then after 10 years of decay, the radionuclides would be released into ocean, and then dilution would be the solution going forward. And this sounds, from today's perspective, this sounds like an odd practice, but this is something that our National Academies of Sciences actually approved at the time. This was considered, at the time, the premier way to manage radioactive waste. And you can see from this table here that a wide variety or a large number of containers were disposed of. You know, in the Pacific Ocean alone, over 56,000 of these drums, totaling almost 15,000 curies. Now, it's important to note, because you'll see this is a driving factor, the cost of this disposal. The way this worked is these drums were shipped to a port. They were put on a Navy ship, and then the Navy would push them off into the water. And the estimated cost was about $48.75 per 55-gallon drum. That amounts to about $6.50 a cubic foot, but those are 1946 dollars. You know, that equates to about $120 a cubic foot right now, and that was considered extremely expensive at the time. And here's just a drawing that shows where these various disposals happen, not just in the U.S., but where other nations also disposed of their radioactive waste. So in 1957, the first commercial nuclear plant in the U.S. opened and started to produce power, and shortly thereafter, many other commercial power plants opened, and they began generating waste. As I mentioned, this waste was expensive, and so the Atomic Energy Commission was looking for a less expensive way to dispose of waste. In 1962, they authorized commercial land disposal, and this tremendously reduced the cost to about $5.15 per drum. Immediately after this land disposal became authorized, 6 low-level waste disposal facilities in the U.S. opened. The first one in 1962 in Beatty, Nevada, followed by Maxey Flats in 1963, West Valley in New York, and also in 1963. The Richland, Washington facility that still operates in 1965, a site in Sheffield, Illinois in 1968, and then one in 1969, the Barnwell, South Carolina site, which still operates. And so at this point, we had 6 operating sites. We had sufficient disposal capacity, and ocean disposal was beginning to be frowned on. And so the Atomic Energy Commission ended that ocean disposal. It was more expensive anyway, and ultimately, from an international perspective, ocean disposal was abolished. Importantly, in 1974, the Congress abolished the Atomic Energy Agency, or the AEC, and they created a new entity called the NRC to assume the regulatory functions of the AEC. In 1978, however, 3 of those 6 disposal sites were forced to close due to performance issues, meaning the radioactive materials that were buried in these sites were either leaking to contaminate groundwater or leaking to contaminate surface soil. So in 1978, 3 of those sites closed. They permanently closed, meaning somewhere around half of the nation's disposal facility was gone. At that same time, around 1978, we had somewhere around 70 operating commercial nuclear power plants. So we were still generating a tremendous amount of waste, but we lost half of our disposal capability in terms of the number of sites. That was in 1978. And then in 1979, things really changed. So the first thing that happened was the Nevada site shut down because they found a large number of packaging and transportation issues. They found some waste containers to be buried outside of the site boundaries. Shortly thereafter, the Washington site also shut down due to waste packaging violations and transportation safety issues. And then also in 1979, the 3 Mile accident occurs. And so, at this point, radioactive waste generators were shocked. The nation was shocked. Radioactive waste was on everybody's mind. It was on television every single night. And this really worried people in the state of South Carolina. They saw a tremendous increase in the volume of waste that was being shipped to their site because they were the only remaining open facility in the nation. And nobody was talking about opening a new site. So they're seeing the number of trucks come through the doors, triple, quadruple, and they thought that was just going to keep on happening. And they were afraid that they were going to become the dumping ground for the nation. As a result of that same year, just imagine all this stuff happening in the same year. The governor of South Carolina orders that waste acceptance operations had to be scaled back 50% over a 2-year period. And this just shocked the radioactive waste generators. The power plants were still going to operate. Other people who use radioactive material needed to continue to operate, but they were facing the fact that Barnwell was only going to accept half the amount of material that it had in previous years. Kind of in line at the same time that all this is happening, this newly formed NRC had to learn how to regulate. They opened their doors, so they were formed by Congress in 1974, and they really began their operations in 1975. And the way that they regulated waste was with really just a very generic set of regulations. At the same time that that's happening, Congress asked the Government Accountability Office to investigate the things that were going on at these disposal sites that were leaking all over the country and having all of these transportation violations and packaging violations. They wanted them to investigate this and see what was going on. And in 1976, GAO published a report that said two things. We need criteria to judge the suitability of these disposal sites, and we need standards to determine when releases from these sites happen. As a result of those two things, NRC, understanding that its regulations were generic, and this GAO report, NRC formed a task force to examine the federal and state programs that regulated waste. And not surprising, that task force had recommended that they needed some regulations, and they needed some regulations now. Even so, it took NRC 6 years until 1982 to issue 10 CFR Part 61 that, among other things, classified waste as Class A, B, or C based on the contamination concentrations, or the concentrations in the waste of longer-lived radionuclides and the hazard associated with those long-lived radionuclides. So none of this got, if this would have been done earlier, maybe we would have avoided some of the things that happened in 1978 and 1979, and things could have been different. But there just was so much going on in the late 70s that it led us to the point where we are today. And the point that we are today really starts with the 1980 Low-Level Radioactive Waste Policy Act. You know, we say it was passed in response to recommendations from state-supported organizations, but it really was the governor of South Carolina. It was the governor of Washington State. You know, because the Richland site only temporarily closed. They were going to open again, and those two states, located in opposing parts of the country, didn't want to be the only places responsible for disposing of all the nation's waste. You know, you're going to see in a little bit, you're going to see a map that shows where all the nation's commercial power plants are at. There's very few of them in South Carolina and Washington State. All of these power plants are benefiting people in other states. So why should it be the responsibility of these two states to dispose of all that waste? Now, importantly, this Low-Level Waste Policy Act does not address defense-generated waste, high-level waste, source material, naturally occurring radioactive material, or accelerator-produced radioactive material. It exclusively concentrates on what is defined in the Atomic Energy Act as low-level waste. And part of what this act does is it encourages states to form regional compacts that allow them collectively to meet their obligations, instead of proliferating the number of facilities for disposal of low-level waste. You know, a thing that I hear when people talk about compacts is that, and to some part this is true, is, you know, why doesn't every compact have its own disposal site? If every compact had its own disposal site, each of those facilities has to be managed in a way to where it's safe. And if every single state, you know, if we go back to, we put the responsibility of low-level waste disposal on the states, just imagine having 50 separate radioactive waste disposal sites in 50 different states. It would be an unmanageable program. And honestly, the more disposal sites you have, the more expensive radioactive waste disposal becomes. You know, if you limit radioactive waste disposal to, like, Connecticut, you say Connecticut has to dispose of its own radioactive waste. Well, it's a tiny state. So they have the same operating costs, the same executive costs, the same management costs, but if they're only receiving waste from Connecticut, waste disposal has to be very expensive to keep the doors open. So by minimizing the number of disposal sites, we can share the costs, the operating costs of the facility, and keep the disposal costs low. So again, according to this act, low-level waste can most efficiently and safely be managed on a regional basis. Another important thing that this act did is it permitted compacts to exclude waste generated outside of their borders. Okay. It didn't say that they had to exclude the waste, but it gave them the opportunity. It gave the compacts control over the flow of radioactive waste within their region. And the act that designated January 1st, 1986, at the date after which compacts could do this. By 1983, about the time that 10 CFR 20 or 10 CFR to 61 was approved, or shortly thereafter, 40 states had agreed or were negotiating to form 7 low waste compacts. And at the same time, my compact, the Southeast Compact, the states of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia all came together to form our compact. Now, since then, South Carolina and North Carolina have receded from our compact. But at the time, the Barnwell facility was operated within our compact. Okay, so let's talk about what a compact is. And the term compact is actually a slang term. Right? It's really an interstate compact. It involves more than one state. And really all a compact is, it's a term for an agreement, like a contract. So more than one state gets together and they put together an agreement in order to operate together in some manner. And this term, it comes from Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. This is called the Compact Clause. And this clause prohibits states from entering into any agreements or compact with another state or with a foreign government without the consent of Congress. Conversely, this compact clause protects states' rights to enter into such agreements. Now, you can have a compact for any reason you want to. States have compacts, for example, for things like child support. So if I'm living in Tennessee and I divorce my wife and I move to Kentucky, my wife would hope that I would still pay child support that I owe. Well, because of a compact, there's agreement with states to where they make sure that even though one state, so child support isn't something the federal government requires, it's controlled at the state level. So by having a compact between various states, states can make sure that people in their states are still getting that child support. And if any reason at all, you can come together and make a compact. With the exception, you can't make a compact that takes that overrules the rules of the federal government or takes any responsibilities that are due to the federal government by the Constitution. You can't have a compact that says, well, instead of the federal government doing it, we're going to do it. Without the consent of Congress, right? If you want to take something away from the federal government, you have to get the consent of Congress to do that. Now, the Supreme Court looked at this compact clause, and they have adopted what's called the functional interpretation of that, in that they only require compacts that undermine federal sovereignty in some manner to get congressional consent. So why then do these interstate waste compacts require consent from Congress? Well, it goes back to the Constitution again. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, we have what's called the Commerce Clause. And the Commerce Clause grants Congress the power to regulate commerce and serves as the basis for federal authority over economic activities that cross state lines, things like transportation. And we call that interstate commerce. So the federal government regulates interstate commerce, the states do not. Waste of any sort, not just radioactive waste, is a commodity. It's a commodity that is transported over state lines. So in order to generate a waste compact, if you're going to interfere with that commerce, you have to have a congressionally approved agreement between the two or more states. And so that's why we use the term compact. And really, it's an interstate compact. A state can't form a compact by its own. All right. So now let's talk about this low waste timeline in the compact area now, because things had changed now. We did have these originally these 7 compacts. We have 10 now. So the Low-Level Waste Policy Act originally intended that each of these compacts would have their own disposal facility. But by 1983, nobody was building any new facilities. There was a 1986 milestone in the act, and it was clear that that was not going to be met. So in 1986, Congress got together again. They approved what's called a Low-Level Radioactive Waste Policy Amendments Act, and extended that deadline for restricting out-of-region waste, right? Meaning that the existing disposal sites had to keep taking waste from all over the country until we saw what other sites were going to be operational. In 1981, an organization called EnviroCare, which is today the Energy Solutions site in Clive, Utah, received a license from the state of Utah to dispose of what's called low activity waste. Now, even though they're located in a compact, they didn't intend on being a compact facility. This is a license from the state of Utah. And it's not a license for low-level radioactive waste disposal. It's something that they called low activity waste at the time. And that facility did not have any outer region restrictions. In 1992, the Nevada site permanently closes. So now we're stuck with we're left with only 2 radioactive waste disposal sites in the nation. In 1993, as was allowed by the Amendments Act, they stopped accepting outer region low-level waste, except for a volume agreed to in a contract with the Rocky Mountain Compact. So that leaves, again, the Barnwell disposal facility was disposing of most of the nation's radioactive waste. In 1994, Barnwell then restricts receipts to waste from only the Southeast Compact. So only those 8 states at the time. So now in 1994, there's no radioactive waste disposal option except for those few compacts. Everybody else is stuck holding on to their waste. But we still were generating power. We still were doing research at radioactive materials. We're still operating hospitals and universities that use radioactive material. And so all of these facilities were storing waste on site. And I can tell you that this is about the time I got out of the Navy. And my first job out of the Navy was, once Barnwell eventually opened up again, was to go to all of these facilities and empty these warehouses of waste. And I can tell you, it was scary. It was scary to walk into those places and see drums stacked up to the ceiling. And we would ship truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of waste out of hospitals and universities that simply had nothing else that they could do with this radioactive waste that they were generating. In 1995, the state of South Carolina, which had been hosting the disposal site for our region, withdrew from our compact. And at that time, they did begin to accept out-of-region waste again. So we only went for a period of a little over a year where we had no radioactive waste disposal options in the country, or for most of the country. But then an interesting thing happened, and some people point to this as part of the reason why the compact system is dead. That EnviroCare facility that was expecting low-level, what's called low-level waste, has license amended by the state of Utah to include all Class A low-level radioactive waste with no outer region restrictions. And so what this did is opened up a disposal outlet for all Class A low-level waste all over the country was able to go there. And this facility was significantly less expensive than Barnwell. In fact, if you had waste in South Carolina, it was cheaper for you to put it on a truck and send it to Utah. In 2008, the Barnwell site quit taking out region waste, and in that same year, Waste Control Specialists in Andrews, Texas, opened its doors, and they do accept outer region waste with some restrictions. Looks like somebody's in the lobby trying to get in, Dustin. I don't know if you can handle that. So this is what we look like now. These are all of the compacts. You know, you can see our compact in the bottom corner there. You see the other compacts. There's 10 compacts. There's 10 states that are not part of compacts, though those are in the light blue. What's not shown on here is Alaska and Hawaii. They actually belong to the Northwest Compact. And you can see the nation's active disposal sites here. One in South Carolina, one in the state of Texas, one in the state of Utah, one in the state of Washington. And whenever I show this picture, I always like to point out, look at where these radioactive waste disposal sites are located. You know, the site in South Carolina, we say it's located within the state of South Carolina, but it's actually really close to the border of Georgia. Yeah, and we find this in every instance. You know, we put these disposal facilities in unpopulated areas, and those unpopulated areas are often very close to the borders of other states. So even though it's located in a state, we can't really say that entire region isn't impacted. All right. So I mentioned that the compacts are able to restrict the flow of imports and exports over their borders, and here's just a summary of those restrictions. I'm going to say that the important ones are the ones that are bolded here. You know, like the Southeast Compact Mine, we have no restrictions. You don't need our permission to ship waste into the area. You don't need permission to ship our waste out of the area. But I would say that a big part of why we don't have any restrictions is because we have agreements in place with all these other compacts on how waste will be managed. And because those agreements are in place, because it's handled at the compact level, we don't feel it's necessary to go through a system of requiring these export permits. The Central Compact does require an export permit to ship waste out of that compact. There used to be a cost associated with that permit, but I think that they suspended the cost. So I think you just have to get it now, but there's no cost associated with it. I think. I'm not the executive director of that compact, so I'm not sure. The Rocky Mountain Compact does have an export permit that is required to ship literally anything radioactive out of their 3-state region. And the Southwestern Compact also has an export permit required for things that are classified as low-level radioactive waste according to the Atomic Energy Act. So then, what does all of that mean in terms of low-level waste disposal? Well, the Barnwell, South Carolina facility is in the Atlantic Compact, and they only accept receipts of material from their compact. They don't have restrictions on exports, so if you want to ship waste out of those states to any other facility, it's totally okay. You don't have to get a permit to get it. They do accept Class A, B, and C radioactive waste then from their 3 states, South Carolina, Connecticut, and New Jersey. There's the Energy Solutions Clive Disposal Facility, and I'm just talking about these in alphabetical order. I'm not talking about them in any special order other than that. This facility accepts Class A waste from any state, and there's no compact restrictions. If you want to ship and waste, they'll take it. Keep in mind, this is not a Northwest Compact facility. The Northwest Compact has its own disposal facility. So even though it's located in the state, it's not managed by the compact. Their compact waste or the Northwest Compact's facility is the Republic Services Washington facility. This is formerly the U.S. Ecology Washington site. So they accept receipts from their compact. So you see all of the states here and under that bullet. They also have an agreement in place to accept Class A, B, and C waste from the Rocky Mountain Compact. Now, that's low-level radioactive waste. They also accept naturally occurring radioactive materials, accelerator-produced radioactive materials at that facility without compact restrictions. Anybody in the nation can send them NORM or NARM, but they only accept Class A, B, or C waste from their compact and Rocky Mountain Compact. And then finally, we have the WCS site in Texas. They do have import restrictions for what's called their compact waste facility, or CWF. That facility accepts Class A, B, and C waste from Texas and Vermont, which are the states that form that compact. But they also accept waste from any other state with Texas compact approval. So you have to put together an application package. You submit it. Provided they accept your waste, you can also dispose of that Class A, B, and C waste there. And it's a pretty simple process. It does take a little bit of time to go through that process. And they don't disapprove requests to dispose of waste at the CWF unless you give them a reason to. You know, if you're somebody who has a record of being a transportation problem, a packaging problem, not characterizing your waste the right way, those are the kind of things that they will use to disapprove your waste. But if your license is in good shape, they will accept your waste. The difference being they charge more money for out-of-compact waste than they do in-compact waste. And that, according to a state of Texas statute, they have to give the lower pricing to Texas and Vermont, or Texas and Vermont. Now, in addition to that Class A, B, and C cell, they operate what's called a very low-level waste cell, where certain materials are exempted according to Texas rule and condition 192 of the site's radioactive material license, and they dispose of that material at what's called an exempt cell. And this exempt cell, the term exempt means it's exempt from some of the construction features that are required to build a 10 CFR 61 low-level waste disposal facility. As a result of that, it costs less to operate the cell, and they can pass along those cost savings to customers. Now, that cell does not have any the compact restrictions. Anybody from any place in the country is allowed to send them waste. All right, so let's get to the question here that Dustin posted. The title of this webinar came from Dustin, not from me. He thought that my title was boring, so he jazzed it up a little bit. So, is the compact system dead? Not according to the U.S. Constitution, and some Supreme Court interpretations that happened after that. If states are interested in on interfering with commerce across state lines, the only way to do it is according to the compact clause in the Constitution. You would have to have a compact anyway. You may not have to have a compact that came from the Low-Level Waste Policy Act, but like I said, states have compacts for any number of reasons. So really, the only way to do this, the only way to tell somebody you can't ship stuff into my state is via this compact clause. Okay. Now, in the cases of 3 of the compacts, Atlanta Compact, Northwest Compact, Texas Compacts, which is 3 out of 10 compacts, it involves 13 to 50 of our states, so again, about 30%. These compacts are acting exactly as envisioned by the original Low-Level Radioactive Waste Policy Act. There are other compacts that have never developed their own disposal site, but it doesn't mean that these 3 compacts aren't operating in the way that was intended. Now, in the cases of the Atlantic and Northwest compacts, and we talked about this a little bit, they restrict the amount of waste that the Barnwell and Richland disposal sites can accept. they restrict it to their regions. That means that those facilities are managing less waste than they could. Right? If you're restricted on, imagine operating a grocery store where they only told you you could sell one cereal. If you sold all kinds of cereal, all kinds of different cereals, you could make more money. But if you can only sell the one cereal, you're limited in the amount of revenue you're going to bring in. So as a result of that, it requires rate regulation in order to ensure that those disposal facilities remain viable. That is going to result in higher costs to waste generators. There's no way around that. If you're going to limit the amount of waste you're going to accept, you have to charge more in order to manage that lower volume of waste. In the case of the Texas Compact, they also have some regulation for compact waste facility. But because they don't limit receipts, because they still accept receipts from all over the nation, what that rate regulation is intended to do is keep disposal costs down for the compact states. The states that are willing to accept radioactive materials that never actually benefited their region. So the result there is actually a lower cost to waste generators within their member states. I've mentioned this a little bit already, but the compacts themselves have agreements between them. And these agreements between compacts facilitate long-term access to treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. So things like, a couple examples here are because the Rocky Mountain Compact has an agreement with the Northwest Compact, its generators have guaranteed access to a Class A, B, and C disposal facility, whereas other compacts may not. Other agreements allow return of waste clauses to be effective. So an example is the state of Tennessee operates some radioactive waste disposal facilities. And you'd like to put in their license that if you ship them a waste, or you'd like to have agreements in place where if you ship them a waste and it's mischaracterized and it has to go back to the generator, that there's a mechanism for that to happen. Well, it really can't happen without the compact system. That thing, again, you're putting, you could go to court, right? The generator and the operator could go to court and argue if the waste met the WAC or not. But meanwhile, this non-conforming waste is still stuck on the site. Well, the compacts have an agreement, have agreements in place between them that allows us to return the waste. So all I would have to do is if there was some waste that was stuck in the state of Tennessee, I would just have to contact the administrator of another compact, and we would get that removed because of agreements we already have in place. The compacts also belong to an organization called the Low Level Waste Forum. This is that organization that we were talking about at the beginning when I was introduced, that I'm currently the chairman of. So this forum, the compacts themselves, the 10 compacts and those 10 unaffiliated states, we meet multiple times a year. And in doing so, we're actively participating in leading national efforts that promote the safe and economical management of waste. We're always we're looking at regulations that are coming out. We're inviting the disposal facility operators to come in and talk to us, advise us of any changes to their license, changes to their waste acceptance criteria. So in turn, we can inform the state governments that we're responsible to and the generators of our states. Small modular reactors, microreactors are looming. Fusion has been demonstrated, and the compacts, through organizations such as that Low Level Waste Forum, are getting ready for that. Are getting ready to make sure that the nation has the disposal capacity associated with the increased production of radioactive waste that's going to happen. Now, I mentioned earlier that licensure of the EnviroCare facility back in 2000 or so as a non-compact facility. Many people will point to that as evidence of the day the compact system died. But keep in mind that that site is limited to disposal of Class A waste. They have talked about getting different licenses over the years. It's never come to fruition. And if you talk to them now, they really don't have an interest in B or C waste. The reality is that 90 to 95%, and maybe even more, of the nation's waste is Class A. That's really where all the money is to be made. There's only this small volume of high activity waste that is Class B or C and can't be disposed of there. But this Class A or this Class B and C waste has to go someplace, right? So the fact that there is this out of compact option for the majority of the nation's waste, it does not relieve states of their responsibilities under the Low Level Waste Policy Act for the management of all of these radioactive waste. And not all states and not all regions are suited for near surface disposal facilities. Several of those waste disposal facilities that failed, the ones in Kentucky, the ones in Illinois, they should have never had a disposal facility there. The enemy of a disposal facility is water. So if you're putting it in a place where it rains, where you get a lot of snow, it's going to be a disaster. Our existing disposal sites, I visited them all. Well, the exception is Barnwell. Barnwell probably should never been cited. It's in a state where it rains all the time. It's very green around there. But the other disposal facilities, they're literally hell on earth. Snakes and spiders can't live in this place. The Energy Solutions site, the groundwater is poisonous there. It's just naturally poisonous. You can't drink it. So they are ideally suited for low-level waste disposal. So why not take advantage of those existing disposal facilities, provided there's capacity, rather than build a disposal facility in a state or a region where someday it's going to be a public health issue. I mentioned that you would be seeing a map of the nation's commercial power plants. There are 94. So I mentioned the Northeast Compact. It includes the state of Washington and a couple of states there up in the Northwest, the state of Washington and a couple of states up there. Look how many commercial power plants they have in that area. 1. So that entire site has to operate from the revenue obtained from that one facility. Essentially, I mean, there's other generators. There's going to be universities. There's going to be hospitals. There are the Rocky Mountain Compact states, but again, look at where the Rocky Mountains are. There's no power plants there either, right? So they really are operating to service a small number of clients. As a result of that, their waste volumes are very small. The state of South Carolina, who's in a compact with New Jersey and Connecticut, you see a few more power plants there. The state of Texas, you see a couple in that state, but then look at the rest of the nation. There's 37 states in the U.S. that do not have a compact waste disposal facility in which to send their waste. For those 37 states, their only option is for Class B and C waste is the WCS site in West Texas. So if for some reason that West Texas site shut down, and I got to tell you, I've been there a number of times, I've been to public meetings down there, not everybody in Texas loves that facility. A governor change could shut that facility down, and then these 37 states would be left without a place to send their Class B and C waste. So the compacts are constantly observing that. We're traveling to meetings. We have our finger on the pulse of what's going on with radioactive waste, because if that site shut down, we would have to find a new disposal outlet. This is just commercial power plants. Think about, or the large plants. Think about when fusion gets started. Think about when these microreactors and small modular reactors are going. We're really going to increase the amount of waste that's generated. And we can't just shut these facilities down because they're currently producing at least 20% of the nation's power. And we only expect to see that increase over time. Critics will often cite these export permits that certain compacts have as evidence that the system is broken, particularly since these compacts don't have a disposal site. Well, I'll tell you that these permits are not expensive. They're extremely inexpensive, and they're very easy to obtain. Okay. The compacts themselves have different funding mechanisms, and in some cases, this is how they pay to operate the compact. They don't get money as part of the state budget. They don't get money from any operating disposal facilities, right? And so they have to have a mechanism to pay to operate, and this is how they go about it. Not all compacts do, but a couple do, and people don't like that. And I'll tell you, the loudest critics, the ones I hear complaining the most, they're the ones who failed to get a permit and got themselves in trouble. Now, I will say that these permits have wait times associated with them. They're not super long wait times, but you don't call up one day and have a permit the next day. It doesn't work like that. And in the case of the Rocky Mountain Compact, they have these civil penalties involved when you don't get a permit that contributes to the discontent among people. And I get it. I've been there before. I've been on the other side where I didn't get a permit for something, and I was involved with this, or I wanted to do a project next week. My client was rush, and I couldn't get a permit in time to do it. But it's unfortunately, it's part of the process. Right, so then conclusions then. All right. So to go back to the beginning, according to agreements we have internationally, we now dispose of waste on land rather than at sea. We do that in near what we call near surface disposal facilities. The Low Level Waste Policy Act, under which we currently operate today, is a result of many early issues that impact transportation and disposal, that caused a few of those early waste disposal facilities to leak, in part because they weren't sited well. They were located in areas that probably never should have had a disposal site. And as a result of all that, all but one of the nation's disposal sites closed, and the entire nation was relying on that facility. Our Constitution, which I'm a fan of, reserves certain rights to states, and those rights include the right not to serve as a nation's radioactive dumping ground. If the population doesn't want a disposal facility in their state, or they don't want to take radioactive waste from other states that they're not benefiting from, they ought to be able to say no. So as a result of that, Congress said that the individual states are going to be responsible for the low-level waste that they generate. But it did encourage states then to enter into regional compacts. The intent was never to have 50 disposal sites all over the U.S. In fact, Congress had no idea how many compacts there were going to be. They didn't tell states to form together to be compacts. They just thought that regionally this could be handled in a better manner. And they did envision that each of these compacts would have its own regional disposal facility, but that turned out not to be the case. And I would say it's not required, provided there's sufficient disposal capacity out there. It just makes sense to limit the amount of disposal facilities. Some states accept out of compact waste. That's fine, but it does not relieve states who generate waste of the responsibilities under the Act. Another benefit of this compact system is it presents an opportunity for states, to share resources and split costs, whether it's managing a disposal facility, whether it's getting in front of Congress to talk about radioactive waste policy making, whether it's going to conferences to learn about radioactive waste. You don't have to send everybody if instead you can pool your resources and send one individual, like an executive director of a compact, who then comes back and reports to the individual states. By now, I've beat into the ground that any compact that interferes with interstate commerce, whether it's a waste compact or not, of course, congressional approval. These compacts are what we call quasi-governmental organizations, meaning they're not the federal government, they're not the state government, they're in this place in between. They're established by Congress, and they operate in this odd area between federal and state government. That they are established in a federal law, the Public Law 99-240. So they have to exist. Congress says once they approve that compact, it exists. It's an entity that has to function. Any organization requires some sort of administration, and that's going to cost you something. So even if you're not operating in a disposal facility, you still have things that you need to do. You know, a compact has commissioners. In my case, I have 12. Well, you want to indemnify those commissioners, meaning you want to protect them in the case they get sued for some reason. And so that takes insurance. Well, somebody's got to pay for that insurance. So the compact pays for the insurance. The compact pays for me to do things like this training I'm doing with you. They pay for me to go to conferences. We have an accounting system, so we have to pay accountants. So compacts have costs that have to be covered in some manner. And any policy making, I don't care what kind of policy making it is, it usually involves some sort of trade-off. You know, in this case with the compact system, the thing that we're trading is state or regional desire to either control the movement of radioactive waste or reduce the volume that is disposed of in your state. And you're trading that for these increased administrative costs. And in cases where you're going to limit the receipts of a facility, you have to recover operating revenue that is needed to keep the site viable, which results in higher costs to generators. So this compact system is not dead. You know, I see it every day. Compacts are regularly working for the benefit of the member states and for their constituents. You know, we're examining these political trends, you know, things that are going on in Washington, D.C., things that are going on in Texas, things that are going on in other states. And we're preparing for this nuclear resurgence, you know, these new technologies that are coming out. We have to get ready for that. You know, I can tell you that the small modular reactor guys, the fusion people, they're not preparing to make sure that there's adequate radioactive waste disposal space. Right? They're concentrating on the technologies, and we work with those people. We invite them to our meetings. They talk to us about the waste they're going to generate, so that we can be ready to manage their waste when they're ready to start generating. We participate in national policy making. We serve as an intermediary between our federal policymakers and our state governments. We collaborate with other compacts, unaffiliated states, other organizations like the Waste Forum that act as a consolidated voice on issues that are important to us. And in terms of my own compact, I can speak to certain initiatives that we have. You know, we have what's called a disused source disposal incentive. So there is this there is this program that's funded by DOE. It's through CRCPD, Commerce Radiation Control Program Director. It's called SCATTR. And what SCATTR does is it collects disused sources from facilities. So these are licenses that have a sealed source that they no longer need, that they're just keeping on a shelf. And what SCATTR does is they pay, through this DOE grant, they pay 40% of the disposal costs, leaving 60% of the disposal costs on the generator. Well, if you're in the Southeast compact, we pay an additional 30% of that disposal cost, leaving the generator with only 30% of the total bill for the disposal, which really incentivizes people to dispose of sources that would otherwise be sitting on the shelf. It could be used in the generation of something like a dirty bomb. And we've gotten rid of thousands of sources in this manner. I think that nationwide, it's somewhere around 100,000 sources, and a large number of those have come from our compact. We have something called the Richard S. Hosanner Lecture Award, where we recognize someone who has contributed to some kind of efficiency or technology to the field of waste management. We give them a $5,000 cash award, and we send them to the Waste Management Conference in Phoenix, where they have an opportunity to speak about their work. And we pay for all of their expenses while they're there. So yeah, this is an award that ends up costing the compact somewhere around $12,000 a year. We provide technical expertise through I had a conversation with somebody from the state of Tennessee the other day, a regulator from Tennessee who had a call. There was a citizen in Tennessee who found some radioactive material in his basement. It was a small jar of uranium acetate or something that his father used to have. And so the citizen was stuck with the material, and I talked to the regulator about possible either inexpensive ways to dispose of that waste, or possibly even free ways to dispose of that waste that the citizen wasn't stuck with. We provide training through presentations like this, and we have a budget for our compact people, or our commissioners and alternate commissioners, who are generally, for the most part, they're agreement state regulators. We send them to conferences. We pay for them to go to the conferences. We pay for their travel expenses. We pay for their attendance expenses. And with that, I have no idea how I did on time. Probably about right, but if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to take them.
All right. Yes, thank you very much, Tom. Yes, if anybody has any questions, I did find a new format system with Teams. I can turn your microphone on and stuff like that. So if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand or put it into the Q&A session, or even chat session, stuff. So we'll see how it goes. Unless we get a whole influx of people and such, we'll go with microphones here. So let me find you, Phil. I saw you have your hand raised here. All right, give it a try, Phil. Just unmute yourself though. Oh, I guess it's not going to work. I guess you probably have to type it in, Phil.
Or if anybody just wants to complain about the compact system, that's always been half of my time, listening to those complaints. I mean, I don't mind them. I like to hear them because it gives me an opportunity to, possibly convince someone otherwise.
All right, I think you typed it in here. Phil said in the past, both EPA and NRC unsuccessfully attempted to define low activity waste that could be disposed of at hazardous waste sites. These attempts failed in part because there was no accepted lower limit for Class A LLRW that would define an upper limit for LAW. This would expand the limited availability of acceptable disposal sites for either low activity or very low activity waste. It would also be consistent with the intent of Executive Order 14300. Your thoughts? And Tom, I think you should be able to see the questions too.
I don't see them. I don't know how I can, but
go to the top and click on the Q&A up top.
But first, Phil, I want to congratulate you on being the world's fastest typer. There's no way I could have typed that question into the 10 seconds that Dustin gave you. But you are correct. In the low-level waste forum, was also interested in a definition for what very low level waste is the term that we use. So this is it's waste that otherwise would be Class A, but it's such a small fraction of Class A that it really doesn't prevent much hazard. And then so maybe you could dispose of it at something like that exempt cell at WCS. And in fact, that's exactly what this waste is. It's the same waste that goes to Tennessee and it goes through a bulk survey for release. It's not that those wastes aren't radioactive. They're just determined to be at such a low activity level that there is a disposal facility for it. There are disposal facilities that Republic Services operates in Idaho and in Michigan that dispose of this very low level waste. NRC looked at it, as you mentioned, and what they decided is that it looks like the framework the U.S. has already works. We're already disposing of material in these RCRA facilities. If you look at subpart K of 10 CFR 20, it does talk about the fact that that certain materials can be disposed of at any facility that is regulated under the nation's Solid Waste Policy Act. So it's under RCRA. At NRC, I don't think they're going to change their mind. They looked at it. They came out with like a conclusion, a policy statement, whatever. Everything seems to work. We're leaving it the way it is. The forum pushed back on them, and then they told us the same thing again. The truth is, the system does seem to work, right? Nobody's prohibiting the WCS site from disposing of these radioactive materials in the RCRA facility. The Republic Services sites I talked about are RCRA facilities. Where that bulk survey for release material goes, that site is managed under RCRA, right? So there are opportunities to dispose of these very low level wastes, but what NRC is doing is they're leaving it up to the individual states to decide. I don't have a problem with that.
All right, thank you, Tom. We have a question in the chat over here. Have you heard anything from Oregon Department of Energy or Oregon Department of Energy, OR, as part of the Northwest Compact? That is a question.
Have I heard anything from them? I'm not in the Northwest Compact, so I wouldn't hear from them. I'm not. I just came back from one of those low-level waste forum meetings where all the compacts there were there, including the Northwest Compact, and I spoke to their executive director, and she didn't mention that there was anything going on up there with that facility, but I'm not aware of anything. I'm here in Tennessee.
And that was from Martha Dibley. I think so. All right. Anybody else? Another person had a question regarding the a link for the recording. I will try to provide a link for it. I know sometimes with Teams and the recordings and the links, sometimes if you're not a part of my organization or my team's organization, it doesn't go. But I will do whatever I can to do that, to send it out to attendees. But if I can, at least put it onto the Health Physics Society LinkedIn page, as well as Health Physics Society Facebook page, maybe another place or two. Health physics or nuclear decommissioning related. So, and also if you join the decommissioning section, I'll be sending a link out with that as well. So anybody else have any questions, have any comments? I mean, hopefully this format worked well with Teams as well. I guess I'll put a plug in for it as also, this is the webinar format. If you go to present something or go to set up a meeting, you can actually set up an event or set up a webinar and a few other types of things to where you can limit participation and have a Q&A session and all that stuff. So hopefully it worked well. And then one last comment. Martha says Oregon has its own BRC rule. It's called Pathway Exemption Rule, and that was what we used to show the ARC chutes containing norm could be exempt.
Okay. Yeah. So just like agreement states can have rules that are more restrictive than the NRC, our individual states can have rules that differ from what the compact rules are, right? So the compact puts rules in place for the region, but you know what? If a state says we want to do something different, but it's at least that restrictive, you know, we don't have an issue with it.
All right. Again, thank you very much, Tom, for your time. Thank you everybody else for attending, and we'll try to set up another decommissioning related talk in the next quarter or so. Probably focus on some sort of, whether it's accelerators or reactors or laboratory decommissioning on that aspect. So we'll be in touch. We'll get something out for everybody. But again, thank you very much, and we will end it here. I'll try to get a link out to everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.